Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All right, reading from Canto 2, Chapter 4, Text 24. Namas Tasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Papur Jnanam Ayam Saumya Yan Bukamburuhashavam. All right. Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Papurgyanam Saumya Yan Mukhamburuha Shavam. Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Papurgyanam Saumya Yan Mukhamburuha Shavam. Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Papurjnanam Ayam Somya Yanmukham Buruhasavam. Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Papurjnanam Ayam Somya Yanmukham Buruhasavam. Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Papurjnanam Samsomyam Yanmukham Buruhasavam. Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Papurjnanam Ayam Somya Yatmuk Asavam. Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Papurjnanam Ayam Somya Buruhasavam. Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Papurjnanam Somya. What? Go.
Namastasmai Bhagavate
Namastasmai Bhagavate
Vasudevaya Vedase
Vasudevaya Vedase
Papurjnanamayam Somya Yanmukham Buruhasvayam.
Mataji's?
Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase
Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Papurjnanamayam Samya Yatmurasavam. Namastasmai Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Ganamayam Sonya. Okay, word for word. Namaha, my obeisances. Tasmai, unto him. Bhagavate, unto the personality of Godhead. Vasudevaya, unto Vasudev or his incarnations. Vedase, the compiler of the Vedic literatures. Papuhu, drunk. Jnanam, knowledge. Ayam, this Vedic knowledge. Samyaha, the devotees, especially the consorts of Lord Krishna. Yat, from whose? Mukha amburuha, the lotus-like mouth. Ashavam, nectar from his mouth. All right. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Srila Vyasadeva, the incarnation of Vasudev, who compiled the Vedic scriptures. The pure devotees drink up the nectarian transcendental knowledge dropping from the lotus-like mouth of the Lord. Purport. In pursuance of the specific utterance, Vedase, or the compiler of the system of transcendental knowledge, Srila Sridhar Swami has commented that the respectful obeisances are offered to Srila Vyasadeva, who is the incarnation of Vasudev. Srila Jiva Goswami has agreed to this, but Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has made a further advance, namely that the nectar from the mouth of Lord Krishna is transferred to his different consorts, and thus they learn the finer arts of music, dance, dressing, decorations, and all such things which are relished by the Lord. Such music, dance, and decorations enjoyed by the Lord are certainly not anything mundane, because the Lord is addressed in the very beginning as para, or transcendental. The transcendental knowledge is unknown to the forgetful conditioned souls. Srila Vyasadeva, who is the incarnation of the Lord, thus compiled the Vedic literatures to revive the lost memory of the conditioned souls about their eternal relation with the Lord. One should therefore try to understand the Vedic scriptures or the nectar transferred by the Lord to his consorts in the conjugal humor from the lotus-like mouth of Vyasadeva or Sukadev. By gradual development of transcendental knowledge, one can rise to the stage of the transcendental arts of music and dance displayed by the Lord in his Rasa Leela. But without having the Vedic knowledge, one can hardly understand the transcendental nature of the Lord's Rasa dance and music. The pure devotees of the Lord, however, can equally relish the nectar in the form of the profound philosophical discourses and in the form of kissing by the Lord in the Rasa dance, as there is no mundane distinction between the two. Om Gana Timanandasya Ganan Janjana Salakaya Chakshorum Nidatamyena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobis Tapitamyena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamayam Datti Swabanantikam Vande Ham Shri Guru Shri Yukta Prakamanam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shra Shri Rupam Sagratam Sagana Raganavtam Mitam Tam Shrivam Savadvaitam Savadutam Prijana Saritam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Bhadan Sagana Lalitam Shri Vishakamitam Shcha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimante Bhakti Vikas Swaminiti Namane. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimante Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunivali Paschatara Starine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namaste Bhagavate Vasudevaya Vedase Purjnanam Mayam Somya Yanmukam Buru Asavam. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Srila Vyasadeva, the incarnation of Vasudeva, who compiled the Vedic scriptures. The pure devotees drink up the nectar, the nectarian transcendental knowledge, dropping from the lotus-like mouth of the Lord. So this is the conclusion of the of Sukadeva Goswami offering prayers, glorifying the Supreme Personality of Godhead before diving into what the next chapter is, which is, this chapter is called the process of creation. Next chapter is called the cause of causes, but explaining the process of creation. So in the beginning of this chapter, Maharaj Parikshit was asking different questions, those are there, I don't have to go through them all, but pretty much just like, the Supreme Lord is creating, what's his position, kind of like that, like how is the universe created? Because the second canto, I believe, is called Visarga, which is secondary creation. So Maharaj Parikshit was interested in hearing that. There's different ways it could be understood, but it's in relation to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because he creates, maintains, and to understand Krishna properly, he first of all has to be understood in parampara, evam parampara praptam, but also his glories have to be understood in completely, not that we just focus on one aspect of Krishna and forget everything else because it's secondary and not so important and not so relishable. We'll get to that a little bit later. So Parikshit Maharaj was interested in hearing all about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all about his creation, what he does, his activities. It wasn't, what's the word? It wasn't uninteresting to him, because he's going to, as the Leela goes, he's cursed to die, so he doesn't have long to live. So you may think, oh, I don't have so much more time to live, so, whatever, just skip to the 10th canto, just read only Krishna book. I don't have time to hear all this other stuff. But all this other stuff, as we see by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, points to Krishna and his different leelas, because we could see without the what's the word shall we use? The Premanjana Trita Bhakti Vilochanena of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, we wouldn't understand this whole other perception that he's giving into the nature of this particular verse, actually, because maybe face value is the wrong word, but just by reading it and looking at it, they translate it also, but it just seems like Sukadeva Goswami just offering his obeisances to Vyasadeva in that way. So anyways, so Sukadeva Goswami, he's going to speak something which is, it's different. So there's generally in the material world, also in the transcendental knowledge, to speak something, like if we're going to speak about, atomic physics or, whatever this, but like something very high, nuclear engineering, things like that. It takes years of studying that knowledge and, hearing regular discourses and reading different books to begin to like grapple the terminology and all those things, to like follow the conversation. And then it takes much more experience to be able to explain that knowledge also. Different levels of intelligence. Somebody can, may be able to study very nicely, but then he's not able to, speak very nicely or remember nicely, all these different things. So there's different levels of intelligence. So this explaining the science of the creation of the material world and how it all functions and how it all works and things is very difficult, actually. So Sukadeva Goswami is offering prayers in that regard. So we can see his mood, and we can also understand and relate to that, because to explain all this, he's praying for Krishna to help him in his ability to explain that. Just like we were reading previously, that I think it was the verse yesterday, that he was praying for the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be pleased to decorate my statements, so that, and he was offering that he's so great, so amazing, all these things. We've been studying them, and then we've been reading them, and we're chanting them in the morning, glorifying the position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's showing, so he's begging for the blessings of the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be able to explain the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because to explain Krishna, we need Krishna's blessings. There's no question of explaining Krishna or preaching Krishna consciousness without the blessings of the spiritual master or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because otherwise it'll just be an intellectual feat. And there are individuals who have no devotion. Their devotion is zero, zip, none. And they're very learned and expert in Vaishnava philosophy. But they don't understand the Siddhanta properly. They can explain everything, and then you can find these individuals in different religious departments, professors of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And they can explain all the ins and outs and things like that. Just like I've heard one time, there was one professor in one university. He explains, Shankaracharya, he's juggled the Vedanta and this and that, and he's construed some different meaning, and he's screwed out a whole impersonalistic interpretation from the Vedas. But Krishna Supreme. But he can say Krishna Supreme, but just saying Krishna Supreme, that's one step. But one has to fully surrender. Krishna is supreme, so then what is my position into Krishna? There must be devotional service. So the main aspect is this devotional service. So Sukadeva Goswami is praying in that mood in Krishna consciousness of devotional service. I think it's mentioned in the verse here. Let me see. No, it's not mentioned particularly here. Maybe I was reading somewhere. It's in another verse. Anyways, but it's in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, but in that particular verse, the second part of it mentions that this Bhagavat Purana can only be understood by devotional service, not by intellectual knowledge. So Sukadeva Goswami is seeking those blessings because it's difficult. So it's difficult just to understand all that, and I don't really think many of us can even explain it. Those of us who have read the second canto, and also in the third canto, there's a similar description of just the process of creation and how, the different, the Prakriti, that Vishnu glances at the pradhana, the unmanifested, the Mahatattva, and then that vision, it becomes Shambhu personified, and then Shambhu interacts with Prakriti, and then the Mahatattva is agitated, and then all the modes and everything start generating, and then all those, I can't explain it probably because I don't understand it. And then you have the process of creation. Lord Brahma is there, and there's nothing, and he performs tapasya. And then Gokul Chandra Prabhu also talks about this in his Goloka Chart seminar. I think on the fourth part, where he describes the material creation. So then all that's there, and then you have the So you have the elements to describe. So you have ether, which sound is contained in that, and then ether goes to air. Then there's sparsha, touch, and then from this wind, I think. What's the next element? Is it fire? That touches. Yeah. So then fire. Then the sight's there because you can see the fire, and then the fire, the water. The water has No, not taste. I think form. The taste is in the earth. Oh no, smells in the earth. So then water has taste, yeah. And then the earth, and then there's the scent there. And then all those senses correlate to that. And then in the 11th canto also describes when they want that's also described in short in the Uddhava Gita, and then they all wind back. And it's extremely complicated to explain all that, to understand that. Another amazing thing too is that Sukadeva Goswami, which we don't really think about it so much, is that he's speaking in one shot. Not that he's like, oh, I forgot this, let me go back to that, or wait, that, or like I'm spacing out right now and I can't explain it properly. So he's explaining it all in one shot. So this is a high level of intelligence. But also similarly, this intelligence, he's able to communicate that to other individuals also. Because sometimes we may understand something very, very nicely or very easily, but then we can't communicate that to others. Like we may have a question in the Bhagavatam class, but then we're going on and we can't really formulate what our question is, or we're trying to explain something, and then it's like we don't really understand it so well, we can't give proper analogies. We see that Srila Prabhupada was actually very expert at that. He was very he was empowered by the Supreme Personality of God to explain all these complex things very simply and very easily. You just like you read one small book by Srila Prabhupada, like Perfection of Yoga, or Beyond Birth and Death, or something like that. Elevation of Krishna Consciousness, and you read that, it's like this. He explains correctly the whole process of Krishna consciousness in some 50 pages, very simply. And even in one thing I was reading recently, this is also I think in London, they gave Prabhupada like some couple minutes to speak, explain the whole process of Krishna consciousness. Anyways, just coming to mind now, I would have brought it, but he explains it very simply that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By chanting Hare Krishna, we come in contact with Him, and our lives become blissful and sublime. So, like Srila Prabhupada was able to explain these complex, Vedic, like Vedanta Sutra, which is like, you see even like just one word, it's like so expanded. I mean, the Srimad Bhagavatam is a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, but he was able to explain these things in just such succinct ways that people were able to understand it very easily and take to the process. So that's a high level of intelligence that's required for that. Because reality of the truth is truth of reality is that the spiritual knowledge given in the Srimad Bhagavatam, specifically of understanding the Jivatma's relationship with Bhagavan and the duties that correlate to that, is much more difficult and much more complicated to actually understand fully than any material science, because there's a whole other dimension that's involved in that. Material science, to understand things materially, there's some degree of surrender, and then whatever, you exercise your brain power and you work so hard, but Krishna consciousness and to understand the spiritual science isn't intrinsically based upon just exercising brain power or just working hard. One has to surrender, and one has to surrender fully, Atma Nivedanam. Because in material science, one may surrender. Like one may go to a university and surrender his time, surrender his money, and like that. But we see, particularly nowadays, that one surrenders one's time, one surrenders one's money, but one doesn't surrender one's self fully. That one still maintains one's, inclinations or characteristics or habits or whatever. That there really isn't a change of heart. But in Krishna consciousness, to study from any teacher, of course, there has to be, this humility and inquiry and all these things. But the main aspect, of course, with the guru-disciple relationship, that transcendental knowledge is there, but accompanied with that transcendental knowledge is the service, as the service. This tatvidi paripatina prashtena sevaya. So this seva is intrinsic because the knowledge is bestowed by, it's a complicated process, but very simply to understand is that the knowledge comes within the heart when the spiritual master in Krishna is pleased by the sincere service attitude. And so, but in the material world, you can, displease your teacher or your authorities, and then you can acquire some level of knowledge intellectually. Just like there's so many big demons in the world who are very smart intellectually and whatever, they disregard authority or whatever. Maybe they don't disregard authority, but their whole outlook is atheistic and, whatever. And they utilize that intelligence for creating, whatever, nuclear weapons or biological weapons or, whatever, what is this, like, I don't know the exact word for it, but just like whatever, smart computer warfare, for lack of a better word. They have all these weapons and they're so advanced that, you just press a button in a computer and then the missile can launch off and, it knows the satellites and all that and can land, in some place in the Middle East or something like that. So this intelligence is there, and so one doesn't have to necessarily surrender to get this intelligence. But so surrender is required to get the spiritual knowledge, to understand it, and then to also communicate it with others. That surrender is needed. So it's very difficult, actually. So Sukadeva Goswami is praying in that mood because he's going to explain something very difficult. And so also, even intrinsic within that, Sukadeva Goswami is offering obeisances to Srila Vyasadeva, his father, his spiritual master, who taught him the Vedic knowledge. And he's thankful for that. It's not that, that Srila Vyasadeva taught him the knowledge and thank you very much and, whatever. So that kind of mood wasn't there so much. The whole pastime in Leela with Shukadeva Goswami is very amazing, actually, that he, immediately upon being born, he left home. He's such a renounced devotee. But he was extremely renounced, we can understand, but he wasn't too renounced to take relish in the pastimes of Krishna, because as explained in the first canto, Atmarama Chi Munio Nirgranta Ap Krumut Nirgranta Ap Krumut. I'm saying it wrong. Anyways, Kurvanta Haita Kim Bhaktim Ita Bhuta Guno Harihi. So Srila Sukadeva Goswami was a self-realized soul from birth, completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness. Though the pastime was there, that he seemed like he wasn't. So anyway, so he was attracted to the topics of Krishna. So he came back, and then he, anyways, all the details aren't given in the Srimad Bhagavatam, but he learned the Bhagavatam from Vyasadeva. So he learned all these things. He studied all these things, the process of creation and all these different intricacies. So he's thankful to Vyasadeva for that opportunity, that knowledge. So also there's another lesson that one needs the blessings to explain the knowledge, but one's also thankful for the transcendental knowledge, because the spiritual knowledge makes a difference in one's life, actually, if one takes it seriously. So naturally that gratitude is there within the disciple, though he may not explicitly state it 24/7, but it's just there. It's understood. It's because you take the instruction of the spiritual master as one's life. So one's life becomes completely entwined with the Vani of the spiritual master. And what does this Krishna say? As in the body, I'm forgetting the verse. Mata paratanam nanyat kinchin asti dhananjaya mai sarvam idam proktam shrute maniganaiva. So Krishna is explaining that he's within everything. He's situated there by his energies. Just as you have the pearls, the string is there undetectably within the necklace. So the Vani, or the instruction of the spiritual master, will be there, and one may not be able to realize it or understand it just by glancing at the disciple, how he's built his whole life around the instructions of the spiritual master. But the instructions are completely supporting every activity in every direction of the disciple. Just like the spiritual master may give some instruction, whatever, to go distribute books. So the disciple may be taking prasadam and may, say, well, I don't want any more prasadam. But why doesn't he want more prasadam? You may not really think about it. Well, he doesn't want more prasadam because then he may overeat. And if he overeats, it'll slow him down. And if it slows him down, he can't distribute as many books. And he wants to distribute books to please his spiritual master. So he's eating simply for the pleasure of the spiritual master, though all this intellect may not go into it. But that principle is there unseen. So this is the different levels and dynamics of understanding, the great personality of these transcendental souls, actually, like Srila Vyasadeva and Sukadeva Goswami and all these individuals, because we see them as great, and they're great acharyas and great Vaishnavas, and they're amazing, powerful. They've done so many amazing things, and we're inspired by them, and also other devotees too in the Srimad Bhagavatam. But they're great towering acharyas, but they're also great towering disciples, because they show the mood and how one should be a disciple and how one should behave. So many things could be said on this topic, and we'll come back to it a little bit. But just to touch on another point, which Srila Prabhupada highlights in the purport. So one thing is that, so Srila Sridhar Swami brings out the point that this Veda say is referring to Vyasadeva. And then Srila Jiva Goswami agrees with that. But then Vishwanath Thakur seemingly disagrees with that, or he takes a different understanding. So he explains that this this verse also refers to the consorts of Krishna, who, obtaining the nectar from Krishna's lotus-like mouth, they learn, display the different fine arts. And a couple of them are mentioned here. And there's a longer list given. It's given in Srila Prabhupada's books. I forget exactly where, but I know it's in the Brahma Samhita, where all these different transcendental arts are mentioned. So he takes a completely different approach to that. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is generally noted to taking these Rasik approaches in the Srimad Bhagavatam and things like that. And it's important, like I was saying in the beginning, to note that one who is on that level, he can see, in the Bhagavatam, in all verses and everything, he can see. I forget where it's exactly mentioned, but the acharyas who are on that level, they can see these verses, how exactly this relates to Radha Krishna, or how this relates to Vrindavan, and it's not an artificial thing. And then, of course, they have these slokas to back it up. They have the pramans to back it up. Not that they just say something whimsical and, this is my speculation, and they just go off with the wind with it. But they're able to say, well, this is why this is like that, because this refers to this. Just like it's mentioned in the word for word, Somya, the devotees, especially the consorts of Lord Krishna. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur takes that turn. And one important aspect, he explains some of these things in the purport. But in order to understand these things, we have to understand it in the proper way. So, evam parampara praptam. So this parampara, to understand Krishna, to understand his devotees, to understand his pastimes, to understand everything of the transcendental science, one has to hear it from the proper source. Just like recently someone was asking a question and they cited a questionable source for where they got that information from one individual that isn't, practicing Krishna consciousness according to how Srila Prabhupada taught. So if we hear from those who aren't properly situated in the parampara, what is this? I think Rupa Goswami, prani prantra chiki vinam vina haitang tiki parer bhaktir upatayeva kalpate. So he explains that if we hear from those that don't understand the Shastra properly, it'll just create confusion. And even when we're aspiring on the path of pure Krishna consciousness to obtain the highest fruit, which is obtainable in all the three worlds, realistically speaking, there is nothing to be had in the material world except Krishna consciousness. So one who comes to that position, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu makes the point in the 19th chapter, I believe, of the Madhya Lila, and his instructions to Rupa Goswami, that how rare Krishna consciousness is, that living entities, he's in the material world, and there's so many different forms of life, and then one gets a human life, and then all those human lives, some are civilized, some are uncivilized, and he just really breaks it down. And then one may come to the human form of life, and then he's interested in karma, and then he gives that up. Then he's interested in jnana, and then your yoga, and then in personal. But then one comes to one comes to Krishna consciousness. But then he may be attached to whatever, I'm doing my Krishna consciousness, but at the same time I want to enjoy the material world, or I'm executing Krishna consciousness when I'm interested in all this knowledge, or I'm executing Krishna consciousness, but I have all these desires. But one who's fortunate is Brahmanya Konite Bhagavan Kunya Bhagavan Jeev Guru Krishna Pasari Pai Bhakti Lata Beach. So he comes in contact with the proper guru, and the guru gives the proper knowledge. And then from the mercy of Guru and Krishna combined, from the mercy of Krishna, one gets the proper guru, and then from that bona fide spiritual master, one gets Krishna. And one gets that knowledge, one develops that bhakti lata beach. So it's so important to hear the proper transcendental sound, the Sabda Brahman, from those who are properly following. Otherwise, misconceptions will just ruin one's Krishna consciousness or confuse one in the pursuit of that endeavor. So the hearing from the proper source cannot be underemphasized. It's has to happen from beginning, middle, and end. Even in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, that's taught. That I forget exactly who says, but the point is mentioned that if one hears from Mayavadi, even a Mahabhagavat can fall down. So how careful we have to be in hearing Krishna consciousness, hearing from the right source, and making an endeavor to hear from the right source. Not that we just hear from, this person and that person because it makes me feel nice, or I like what they say, or they speak Krishna consciousness in such an amazing way. We shouldn't place so much emphasis on how we feel or how nice it is or all these different things, because what may be nice and pleasing may not be what is actually good for us and where we're at in Krishna consciousness. So one has to hear from the proper source, because if the proper source isn't heard from, then misconceptions will come of who Krishna is and the nature of Krishna consciousness, and what Srila Prabhupada wanted, and what we should be doing, and all these different things. And then one slowly veers off and the point is missed. Just like last night we were talking about, Dr. Trace mentioned that, we read that poem and it was saying, well, generally it's not that someone just jumped, whatever. It's just in big Maya right off the bat. Usually it's it takes a little bit of time, compromising here, compromising there, and then 50 years later, one is eating karmi grains, drinking Coca-Cola, and preaching, whatever. Don't be so serious about Krishna consciousness or something. So it's generally, it can be. It doesn't have to be. It depends on one's desire. You could really fully surrender to Maya and jump right in, full-fledged. But generally, we see it's a gradual deterioration. So that, and then when one is going in that gradual way, then slowly one begins to have misconceptions. And just like I was telling Mitravan some weeks, maybe some months ago, that there was one devotee, senior devotee, and he's explaining that when he hears classical karmi music, that reminds him of Krishna. And then that individual played some for another individual, and then that individual remarked that when I hear this classical music, it reminds me of Krishna's Rasa Leela. Wow. So that's verbatim. No, I'm not exaggerating at anything at all. When they hear that classical music, and then this specific to the composer, anyways, it's not so important. No, I don't think anybody would know. And so they're speaking in that way. So they hear this classical music, and yeah, it's not, it's not like some heavy rock and roll, and it's not blasting about sex, drugs, and killing people and all these things. But the thing is that it's not Krishna conscious. And first of all, as we understand here from the purport, is that, what does it say here? So I don't think that one of the or at least from what I've understood from reading Srila Prabhupada books, is that the music being mentioned here, that the devotees, the perfect Nityasiddha devotees of the Lord are exhibiting these, this is the Vedic music, which is completely different from, which is 100% different. It's the whole structure and the melodies and how you sing the melodies and all these things are different from Western music, actually. For instance, in Western music, there isn't a consideration of time of singing certain scales. At least I've never heard of such a thing. And there's an understanding of, different scales have different moods and things, but there's this whole subtle science, and also too, even within Western music, at least also from my understanding, there's not much of it. There's no conception of, well, in the earlier days there was, but there's not much of an idea that this music is for God or it's given by God. We'll see in the next one of the next coming chapters that Lord Brahma created the 7 notes of the musical scale. This sa da, God my mason. I know the Western equivalent, But so Lord Brahma created that. So even within in short, in all the Vedic sciences like Ayurveda, Jyotish, Dhanurveda, I'm assuming Dhanurveda also, there's an understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that he gave this knowledge, or some great rishi learned it, or like this, and they taught this science. And actually the perfection of that science is to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that understanding is there. And so, but when these misconceptions enter, and then we're listening to things and hearing things and reading things, and then we start saying, well, this reminds me of Rasa Leela, it's indicative of somehow getting off track. And so the good association has to be there, because otherwise, Srila Prabhupada makes the point in this purport, well, if we don't have good association, then we're not going to become Krishna conscious. We're going to become something else. We're going to take birth again in the material world, or we'll take the slow track. And the slow track is, executing a little Krishna consciousness, enjoying, dying, being bored again. Executing a little Krishna consciousness, dying, being bored again. That's the slow track. The fast track is completely surrendering. And in this life, it's possible to go back home, back to God. It's not impossible. It's completely possible. Simply, we have to desire to do it. We have to be greedy. We have to want that. We have to develop that desire. And desires are developed in association. So we have to have the proper association because we may not have whatever. We may have an inclination to enjoy the material world or do this or do that. But if we have the proper association, then devotees will engage us in the service of Krishna and help us change our desire, help our desire become purified. So, but Srila Prabhupada makes the point here. Let me see if I can find it. But he says, there's a couple of points he makes. I was looking for something in particular. Anyways, I'm not being able to find it. But he was paraphrasing. He says that, I guess that's it. By gradual development of transcendental knowledge, one can rise to the stage of transcendental arts and music and dance displayed by the Lord in his Rasa Leela. So we can come to that platform, but we have to understand things properly and cautiously also. And understanding things properly means hearing regularly, taking seriously the practice of Krishna consciousness, reading Srila Prabhupada's books, reading them all, then reading them again, repetitively hearing from the spiritual master the proper topics of Krishna consciousness. Because otherwise, one may talk big things and may, talk this Leela, that Leela, and Krishna enjoyed in this way and did this and that. But then what is the point of talking such big things and reading such big books when one is chanting Hare Krishna and simply falling asleep, or one is chanting Hare Krishna but then enjoying in the material world? So one has to give up that tendency and one has to properly hear, because otherwise it can become sense enjoyment, that we're hearing big things of Krishna consciousness, but then the practical things we're not able to follow at all. So that is why the guru is teaching and speaking and seeing and studying the disciple, and then giving permission to read this or read that, or focus on this or focus on that. Because as one devotee told me recently, which is an interesting statement, but things can go wrong in 1,000 ways. There's so many different ways that things can go wrong in the material world. Things may not work out exactly always how we want them to. Or we may misgauge where we're at, and generally that happens, thinking, well, I'm so advanced, so therefore just let me sit and chant. Chant all day. So Srila Prabhupada would explain that if one is not on that level, simply chanting all day will translate back into sex and money. So one is not on that level, but then his mind is so agitated, he needs something to do, so therefore he starts thinking, and then gets back to that. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he exhibited the highest rungs of theism by showing the ultimate pinnacle of Krishna consciousness, this mood of separation of Krishna. And the Chaitanya Charitamrita, all those verses, they show that this is why Lord Chaitanya came down to establish the Yuga Dharma and also to relish the feelings of the Lord's consorts. So, but Lord Chaitanya practically taught also the behavior of a devotee, of following the rules of Varnashram Dharma, of how he associated with the opposite sex, how he spoke Krishna consciousness, understood, how he associated with devotees, how he took Krishna prasadam, how he, he defeated Mayavad philosophy, how he avoided materialistic association. And also, he taught so many different things. The position of a renunciate, this pastime with Choda Haridas. He showed other examples too of he didn't want to associate with Maharaj Prataparuja because he was a king and he was, money, like that, pounds and shillings, Prabhupada explained. So all these different things are practically taught. So one thing we should understand too is that it's sometimes people may criticize that, well, Srila Prabhupada didn't give the highest thing, like right here speaking in this, and, the essence of it, we have to go to the highest platform of, Gopi Bhav and all those things. But if we actually understand Srila Prabhupada's mood completely, and without getting so much into that direction, but if we understand, if we read the Chaitanya Charitamrita and specifically we understand or study the whole mood of the beginning of that, of why Lord Chaitanya came, and this Radha Bhava Duti Savalitam Nomni Krishna Swarupam, explaining those, that Lord Chaitanya's mood, and all the acharyas are simply preaching and spreading Lord Chaitanya's glory in the Sankirtan movement, and that Bhava of Lord Chaitanya will understand, as I've heard from my spiritual master, that everything that Srila Prabhupada is explaining is meant to push one in that direction of surrendering fully to Krishna and the highest platforms in Vrindavan. And then when that's understood, then it's not seen at all, well, Srila Prabhupada is just saying that. He didn't give the highest thing and this and that. That misconception will be dispelled because Srila Prabhupada, just like we were explaining in the beginning of the class, that Shukadev Goswami is going to explain something very difficult to understand and to explain. So he's begging for the whole Bhagavatam, he's begging for the mercy of his spiritual master. And he's explaining all these different things, ultimately to highlight the supremacy of Vishnu, of Krishna, culminating in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we understand Krishna's pastimes properly. So everything that Srila Prabhupada is explaining is to help us come to the platform of understanding Krishna properly in our relationship with him. Any misconception there will wreak havoc. And then, like we're saying, things can go wrong in 1,000 ways. And then all of a sudden, we're talking about that how, whatever. And I've heard these different things, that this one individual, this one Mataji, was explaining that, she cheated on her husband with somebody else. And afterwards, she was explaining that, well, she was able to understand the gopis better now after doing that. So she transposed her materialistic outlook and misconception and sinful inclinations onto the pure residents of Vrindavan, thinking that they're the same. But our acharyas explain otherwise. Just like it's mentioned here, that such dance, music, and decorations enjoyable, Lord, are certainly not anything mundane, because the Lord is addressed in the very beginning as para, or transcendental. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead is transcendental. His associates are transcendental. It's not anything mundane. And we have to hear this over and over again, because a tendency is there to think, well, this I'm like this, so therefore Krishna's like this, and Krishna's associates are like this and like that. And then I see it in the material world, and then it kind of makes sense, and then, to go off and just to have a misconception. So the acharyas, they explain these things, but they were cautious in it, because the proper understanding has to be there. Because otherwise you just have sahajyas, and then all these crazy things that people say. So the proper Shastak foundation has to be laid. Otherwise, Krishna cannot be understood properly. And if we don't understand Krishna properly, then we won't be able to serve Krishna properly, because there'll be misconceptions, and then that will inhibit one's devotional service. So one has to be hearing regularly, and has to be guided by the association of devotees, so that Krishna is served anukulnyena, in a pleasing way, and satisfied in a pleasing way. There may be discrepancies in the service or, whatever. There may be lackings, but we have to have that mood and endeavor to serve in a pure, proper way and have an understanding and always be asking, what is it that, we can ask, but what is it that pleases Krishna? But then a better question would be, what is it that pleases my spiritual master? Because by pleasing the spiritual master, Krishna is automatically pleased. So we serve the spiritual master and we serve the spiritual master and we worship Krishna. And the spiritual master offers that service to Krishna and then gives us knowledge about who Krishna is and how to understand him. Srila Prabhupada ends this purport by making the point that this, which is a very phenomenal statement. I'll just read it again here. But he says that the pure devotees of the Lord, however, can equally relish the transcendental, relish the nectar in the form of the profound philosophical discourses, in the form of kissing by the Lord in the rasa dance, as there is no mundane distinction between the two. So we generally see the latter, that that devotees that aren't pure, they find so much nectar and Krishna's pastimes and Krishna's Leela, but then the philosophical discourses, whatever, it's boring, it's not interesting, or that part of the Bhagavatam, let's skip over it because it's too heavy or whatever it is. But all these things, the pure devotees, they find those relishable, and because it's these, we need to hear this actually. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would explain that in the Kali Yuga, this chopping method is very effective because people have material attachments, and unless you're kind of like up in one's face about it, usually it doesn't go away. I mean, to the public, we may speak things and encourage somebody that's new, chant Hare Krishna, this and that. But then comes a point where it's, unless you, what is this? Pum shastriya matuni bhava metam, toro grihaya atim, to aptogriya ksheta suptapta vishya, janesyam oham atam meti. So the Rishabhadev explains that this principle of sex life is the most binding in the material world. And all these things come as a result to it. And Srila Prabhupada will explain also that there's wife, and then it expands, and then friends, home, family. In this way, one becomes illusioned by the conceptions of I, me, and mine. So the acharyas, they explain these things, and they help because that may be more relevant than, whatever, Krishna, dancing in the moonlight in the forest of Vrindavan for where one may be at, realistically speaking. So one comes to the point where one has to explain those things, these verdicts of Shastra, which may not be such nice points. And different people, they may have different hang-ups. So the pure devotees, though, they don't shy away from such topics. And they can speak on that, or they can speak on, on those topics. Rishabhdev's teachings, as Srila Prabhupada spoke on those, very much so. They can speak on those at length, and then they can also speak on the intimate pastimes of Krishna. And then we don't get the feeling or the symptom that, Srila Prabhupada isn't so interested in speaking about this. He's only interested in speaking about, Rasa Leela or something. Srila Prabhupada doesn't come off in that way. So the pure devotees, they don't come off like that. That they just, the philosophical things, don't worry about it. There's no point in explaining that. Just go to the Rasik things. Because sometimes we see that some devotees may try to be true transcendental in the sense that, they want to, this philosophy, why speak this so much? We should only speak about, Krishna's Leela and this and that. But it may not be so practical for where people are. And the whole underlying mood of that also is that the Acharya, he's trying to bring individuals to the platform of Krishna consciousness so that they can serve Krishna in his Leela ultimately. And so he's satisfied doing that because he sees that as a service, and he can kind of connect it all together for those that are on that platform. And Srila Prabhupada also explained in different letters some of those different things. So these things are there, and so the pure devotees, they don't make any distinction. Just like one time I remember there's one devotee, he was asked, let's read Krishna book. So then he said, well, what pastime of Krishna book do you want to read? And then I mentioned, oh, I really like this pastime of Krishna. So many pastimes are nice there. But the one that particularly I was saying was, let's read the Rantra pastime, because that's, it's all Krishna's pastimes are amazing. But I was like, oh, let's read that. I really like that pastime. It's really, amazing that, Krishna just, runs away from Jarasandhar and like that and establishes Dwarka. And then he was like, I would prefer if you would just pick either, the Vrindavan Leela, this from chapter this to like chapter like 30 something. That would be better if you would pick something from that area. And so I was confused. I was like, what? Like, why? And I kind of like, I don't remember all the details of what happened, but I was like, why? Like, why can't we read this pastime? And he was really hesitant, but then finally he acquiesced. He was like, okay, whatever, we can read that pastime. So the thing is that there was a misconception there, because he was thinking that, and the acharyas, they do explain things like that sometimes because they're on that level, and it's maybe difficult to understand. Sometimes they may put more emphasis on, Krishna's Leela and Vrindavan and things like that. But they're on that pure level, and that's their vision and things like that, and that's their taste and that's their mood. From the rasa point of view, that's fine. But from where we're at, and from the tattva point of view, all of Krishna's leelas, all of Krishna's pastimes, the whole Bhagavatam, it's pure, it's amazing, and we should be attracted to the whole thing. But it's not that they, out of ecstasy, they may say different things, and may seemingly criticize other great Vaishnava acharyas or sampradayas, but that's not to be taken as that we should absolutely do that. Just like Srila Prabhupada explained that the Lord Chaitanya criticized one devotee and called him a prostitute. So then they printed that in the back to Godhead and were distributing it, and then different people got angry about that. And so Prabhupada was explaining that this isn't something that's just like to be displayed for the public. That Lord Chaitanya explained that and said that, but it's like it's a touchy point. How he called one, one acharya of a sampradaya a prostitute, or being like that, because he wasn't chaste to Sridhar Swami's commentary. So those moods may be there, and we can appreciate them, but we have to be realistic where we are. Not that we're going around and saying, oh, whatever. There's different things we could say. Oh, this, they're worshiping Lakshmi Narayan and they're just wasting their time and da da da. Or Sitaram, this is, what is this? This is, this is dharma. This is an impediment. All these things. We could say so many different things, but that's what the Sahajas say. And so we should, at our level, we should appreciate and understand that they're worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they'll go back to Godhead, because realistically, any pure devotee is association worth having, and our rungs of Krishna consciousness, we, at least from what I've understood, is our home should be just looking to serve Krishna in whatever way we can, and looking to please the spiritual master in whatever way we can. We can aspire, and we should understand, but we shouldn't try to run and do a front flip, back flip, and all these amazing gymnastical feats without being able to even walk properly, because otherwise we'll get hurt very badly. And so all these things are there, and so we have to have the proper mood, we have to have the proper understanding, we have to serve the spiritual master, and if all those things are there nicely, then the proper understanding will develop, and then we'll be able to understand properly in truth Krishna's form, Krishna's pastime, Krishna's entourage. Athat Shri Krishna Namandi, Nabhaved Graham Indriya, Sevan Mukhi Jiva Jo Swayameva Sparakadaha. So these things will be understood in truth properly by engaging in the process properly of Krishna consciousness. So we just have to hold firmly onto the lotus feet of the spiritual master. And we have to always be praying to stay on track and making an endeavor to stay in proper association. And no doubt it's difficult to be Krishna conscious, to practice Krishna consciousness, misconceptions, all these things. It's difficult. It's not easy. But the thing is that, the best things in life generally aren't easy either. If you want to achieve something materially, you have to work hard or whatever. So Srila Prabhupada would explain like that actually, that, fruits like, or whatever, like walnuts and cashews, they take a long time to fructify. It's not just like whatever. You can grow some potato and have some potato in a couple days, or not a couple days, maybe a month or so. But, coriander, you can plant some seeds and have some coriander very soon. But Krishna consciousness is such a rare and amazing gift that it takes time, it takes patience. But it's completely worth it. And it's even the cultivation of Krishna consciousness is blissful also. It's joyful, it's happy, it's a little difficult, but anyways, what to do? That's the price to pay. But what else is there in the material world? If we read the whole books and understand, there's nothing worth obtaining anyway. This phantasmagoria of the heavenly planets, or this snake-like, impersonal liberation. Who wants that? Nobody wants that. Why impersonal liberations? Krishna's pastimes are so attractive. The Bhagavatam is so attractive. So I'll end with one verse here, and then we can open for questions and comments. But there's a nice verse. So, aham vedmi sukho veti, vyaso veti na veti va, bhaktya bhagavatam grayam, na bhuja na cha tikaya. Lord Shiva said, I may know, Sukadeva Goswami, the son of Vyas, may know, and Vyasadeva may know or may not know Srimad Bhagavatam. On the whole, Srimad Bhagavatam, the spotless Purana, can be learned only through devotional service, not by material intelligence, speculative methods, or imaginary commentaries. Imaginary commentaries, that's a big thing nowadays. So I'll read a little bit I'll just read the purport here. Devotional service includes 9 processes, beginning with hearing, chanting, and remembering the activities of Lord Vishnu. Only one who has taken to devotional service can understand Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the spotless Purana for a transcendentalist, Paramahamsa. So-called commentaries are useless for this purpose. According to the Vedic injunction, Yashya Deve Para Bhaktir Yata Deve Tata Garao. All Vedic literatures maintain that Srimad Bhagavatam has to be learned from the person Bhagavata, and to understand it, one has to engage in pure devotional service. Srimad Bhagavatam cannot be understood by so-called erudite scholars or grammarians. One who has developed pure Krishna consciousness and has served the pure devotee, the spiritual master, can understand Srimad Bhagavatam. Others cannot. Hare Krishna. All right. So if there's any questions or comments about anything. Yes.
So I have a few, but I'll make it like really, really fast. So you were saying that we're thinking instead of thinking what pleases Krishna the most.
Yeah.
The best way to know is what pleases the spiritual master the most. So Bhakti Vikas Maharaj put out one lecture in 2018 called "What Pleases Me Most," and then he put out 2 more just like last year, "What Pleases Me the Most." And I recommend devotees share it, so I posted it on both the groups.
Good.
And in regards to this whole thing, Prabhupada didn't give us everything, This whole idea is coming from a big group of Sahajiyas, who basically infiltrated the Gaudiya Math and then infiltrated into ISKCON also. Yeah. And especially there's one like big, Rasik personality, bogus rascal, who, infiltrated. And, he basically always, when he was a disciple of a bona fide disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would sometimes try to leave the association of his spiritual master and go and hear from the Radhakund Babajis. But the spiritual master would always hold him back and say, don't go there, don't go there. But after the spiritual master left, he went to Radhakund and picked out the most esoteric Babaji of those places. And then he came back into the Gaudiya Math saying that the lack of rasakatha, like the lack of like sweet nectarian, like whatever nonsense speculation that they have, is like lacking in the Gaudiya Math. And I've come to introduce it, And that's how like he gained popularity. And unfortunately, a very famous and influential leader within the Krishna consciousness movement who's passed away now, bought him in and like really started to push him forward, which kind of really ruined many things. Anyway, and Guru Maharaj was against bringing in the Sahajiya from day one. And this influential, leader, was like, chastising Guru Maharaj and doing all these things, but Guru Maharaj wouldn't back down. But Guru Maharaj said that later on, this person came and apologized to him.
Yeah.
So Guru Maharaj has always been he's been in it to win it since day one.
Yeah.
And this whole thing, I'll never forget. Like this person that you and me, maybe we're talking about the same person. There were two people like this also. Then you say let's read Christian book, but only let's read like the chapters, the sections talking about the Ras Leela in the Christian book. And I remember going on traveling Sankirtan with this person. He was reading Ujjvala Neelamani and Vidagdha Madhava, and he hadn't even read the 9th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. What's going to happen to such people? Completely gone. They're crazy. Now that most of these people are actually crazy, because Bhaktivinoda Thakur warns that if a person prematurely reads these esoteric pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they will actually go crazy.
Yeah.
The Christian will throw a thunderbolt on their head and they will actually go crazy. And I can think of 4 people that I know personally that this has happened to. I've only been around for like 8 to 9 years and I've already seen so much. They're absolutely nuts, these people are completely crazy, Why? Because they jump too much in. And we can see also that some of these people, like the Sahajas, like influence is always there, but they try to cover it here and there. But bottom line, when it comes to surrendering, they won't do it. For example, one of these people would always like wear karmi clothes and do all that. And we would request him, Prabhu, at least today's Janmashtami, can you wear devotional clothes? No. Can you wear tilak? No. And you're a brahmachari in the ashram,
Yeah.
And then on Janmashtami night, we're all fasting till 12 o'clock. This person goes back to the ashram. Unfortunately, that's what we had to call it. It was a place for eating and sleeping like pigs. But anyway, go back there. And this person would like go buy karmi grains from the store. And even on Janmashtami, he ate karmi grains at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. You couldn't even wait,
Yeah.
And then, this whole thing, he would say like, oh, no, I can't, you guys went to this Ranganath temple to distribute books and got back some Ranganath Prasad. I can't eat it because it'll mess with my devotion to Radha and Krishna and all this stuff. Yeah, he would say that. And, he would like, he was once doing a deep study of the Bhagavad Gita. So like, he would read the commentaries of this bogus guru and that bogus guru and then this acharya and that acharya. He would read everyone's commentary but Prabhupada's commentary, because Prabhupada's commentary is too basic.
Yeah.
And now he's sleeping with someone else's wife and it's a dog.
Yeah.
Such a rascal, such rascaldom, But these things happen so much. Why? Because they see a mundane distinction between Krishna, being kissed by Krishna and hearing philosophical discourses like the way Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada gave it.
Yeah.
And they hate such classes and they hate those people who promote these things. And they'll do anything to get rid of them. It comes to a point where either you leave or they leave. And I've seen it time and again. Sleeping in until 9 a.m. in a brahmachari ashram, can you imagine? Every day, staying awake till 12 o'clock at night. All these things went on,
Yeah.
So just be careful. Sadhu Savdan, be careful who we associate with.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh. Yes, Chitta.
Hare Krishna. So there's 2 extremes in regards to the Rasa Leela. There are those who only want to hear the pastimes of the Rasa Leela, but then there is also the extreme of completely rejecting it. Oh, I'm never going to be qualified. Just completely avoid that part of the Bhagavatam or whatever. So my question is when do we know when we're qualified to hear that? Or, I don't know exactly how to ask, but, we never, for instance, here, we never, go into these, deep, Rasa Leela stuff in the Bhagavatam class.
Yeah.
I know there's, a time and place for that.
Yeah.
If you could just, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So very simply, Bhakti Vikas Maharaj gave some classes. Yeah, and what is and then Prabhupada made the point too, we're not boycotting the gopis. So the thing is that by if you read Srila Prabhupada's books in a systematic way, you'll come to those things. And Prabhupada will explain those things in proper light. And if there's some question whatever devotees can ask. But Srila Prabhupada's mood, just generally, just from everything I've heard from Srila Prabhupada, which was a lot. He never really he doesn't get into that stuff like in his talks and things like that. Even on Radhastami, it was like very philosophical. So the thing is that like those talks are generally like, you know, like really going into detail about like whatever Rasalila and things. That's not like a public thing. And it may not be like a Srimad Bhagavatam thing also. And then one of the other thing too is just like you have to have a qualified speaker to speak such things. And there's a lot of details and things, and then you don't want to like Rasa boss, like you're trying to explain this and that. But then the speaker may take into consideration of the audience. So there's like different factors of like explaining that. But like, you know, on the whole, it's like some of those things can be here and spoken of, but like, you know, like whatever, like, you know, like maybe like 2% of the year, but then the other 98 is like, you know, like we have to like go out, distribute books, push on the movement, surrender, like control our senses, because it's just like, it's like all the way up here, and it's like we're like right here. So then it's like, you know, it's like the topmost, but if we don't have the practical, so that's why that's not like so much spoken of. We're not like against it. I mean, you can hear like in a systematic way, but what happens is like what can happen, just to make a comment on his previous thing, is that one could find more pleasure in those talks, and then not like these other talks, and then one kind of like, well, I'm not, you know, then it's like a push to hear those things and not really like hear the other things, and then it's pleasing to one's senses to hear whatever, like Rasa Lila and all these things, but it's not pleasing to my senses to hear whatever second canto. So therefore, I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to hear the second canto. I read it once. I'll need to read it again. So those things, they're generally not like spoken of like so much like a public assembly of things. That's a couple like short things on that. Yeah, he spoke that.
But how many of the Radha Katha lectures compared to everything?
Yeah, exactly. His thousands. He was qualified to speak. So then, you know, he's Guru Maharaj. He's so knowledgeable, but most people, you know, they may try to speak too soon. Yeah.
In that regard, I think I heard it in a lecture, or maybe someone said something about it. There were like when Prabhupada went to some house and was going to preach to this guy, and he was begging him to, you know, talk about the rest of the
yeah.
And he said, you know, I'm not qualified. Maybe you can speak about it or something. Obviously, like,
Yeah.
but also in that I seen like there's this one time we had the unfortune to distribute. We had to like share a booth with the Sahajiyas, and
Yeah.
they were giving out their books. They're very bogus books. And anyways, one of the groups they distributed to, they came back within like 5 minutes. They were like, "This is like really disturbing. I don't know what this is." And then it presents as like perverted spiritual practice or something, because they're like getting like right into like. Yeah, I mean, like these people were shocked. They were disturbed. They're like, "Can we get our money back? Like, actually, you know, we don't even need our money back. You can just have these books. Like, I do not want these books." Like, so it's like, at least, you know, like obviously with all of our books, we're at least starting them. They have the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, and they're getting the, you know, the very foundational text. So
Yeah, exactly. Without proper philosophical understanding, one will not be able to achieve the goal of life. Something else I'm going to say, but anyway, short thing, ear thing. But at Srila Prabhupada, there's Shabbat Prabhu like tells a remembrance really short. That like devotees are asking Prabhupada all about like, you know, Rasa Leela, this and that. And Prabhupada's not really so interested in like answering. He's just kind of like yes. But then Srila Prabhupada shows like enthusiasm in life when Savas Prabhu like comes and tells him that he's, you know, they're going out every day distributing his books, surrendering, and kind of like that. And Prabhupada explains that that's my real disciple. So anyway, just a small comment on that. But yeah, what?
On that note, regarding what Mahosa Prabhu said about, you know, jumping straight to those high esoteric literatures, and how you literally become crazy, like Krishna. He's like saying Krishna throws a thunderbolt at him. That's
actually from the beginning of Prayo Bhakti Rasana.
Yeah, it's really far out. You can see firsthand. I mean, we've seen personally. We're at this farmer's market, and we're distributing Prabhupada's books, and then one of the members of this, you know, Sahaja group get fried out because, you know, it's the Bhagavad Gita with all these edits or whatever, you know, this and that.
Yeah.
So this person gives gives money and they were happy. And he follows them a few feet down, says a few things to him, gives them the SSR and keeps the Bhagavad Gita. Comes back to the table, gives us back Bhagavad Gita, and starts yelling at us. Just starts going off at us for distributing this Bhagavad Gita. And so, his face is red. It's just nasty guy. Yeah, he walked away, and then Mataji's like, "Oh, you have to excuse him. That's just his mood. That's just his transcendental anger, this and that."
Okay,
So they mistake everything. They think everything they do is completely transcendental. Like, he has a vape in his sticking out his pocket or whatever, and he's wearing these weird chains, and his hair is sticking out. It's like 45-year-old guy is sleazy, Transcendental anger. Anyways, crazy. You can see wow, they're actually crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, what Srila Prabhupada says in his books and everything is a reality. I don't know if the Manajis have any questions or anything. Yeah, there's one over there.
I know you said that it's kind of a big topic, but just on the topic of knowledge being revealed within the heart through the pleasure of the spiritual master or pleasing the spiritual master, would that be equivalent to the realizations of the knowledge, or is it that we don't, of course we read, but if we don't read something that it's, revealed within the heart?
It depends on the purity of the disciple. Generally, it's the not you see with great souls they whatever, because they're attuned to the finer vibrations, like Valmiki, for instance, of the Ramayana. So by Lord Brahma's blessings, he was able to whatever, see past, present, and future, and the whole Ram's Leela, all the details are revealed to him. And so he was able to write the whole thing down. But on a more practical stage, at least with us, is that the knowledge and everything that we're reading becomes realized. And then from that, then it's we're reading it, or it makes sense, or we read the things in Prabhupada's purports, and it's we read it so many times, but then all of a sudden it makes sense, or it clicks, or kind of along those lines of realization. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Hare Krishna.